The rope went taut at dawn on the 15th of August, 1882, and Bethany Garrett watched her husband die with his last words still echoing in the dusty air of Carlin, Nevada. "I never touched those cattle." She stood frozen among the crowd, her cotton dress clinging to her frame in the oppressive heat, as the life drained from Thomas Garrett, a man she had loved for 3 years, but had only been married to for 8 months. The town had judged him swiftly, the evidence seemingly damning when they found him near the canyon, where 40 head of cattle belonging to the wealthy Thornton Ranch had been driven through, ready for transport across state lines. No trial, no judge from the circuit, just the rancher's word and a hastily assembled group of men who called themselves a committee of vigilance. Bethany had screamed until her voice gave out, had begged and pleaded and sworn on everything holy that Thomas was innocent. But her words fell on ears deafened by mob justice and the influence of powerful men who wanted an example made. She buried him that afternoon in the small cemetery on the hill, overlooking the railroad tracks, the August sun beating down mercilessly as she shoveled dirt with her own hands, refusing help from anyone in this God-forsaken town. The preacher offered hollow words about God's mercy, but Bethany heard none of it. Her mind kept circling back to Thomas's face in those final moments, the confusion and hurt in his eyes, the way he had looked directly at her and mouthed, "I love you," before the platform dropped. She was 22 years old and already a widow, with nothing to her name but a small cabin on the outskirts of town, $40 in savings, and a burning conviction that her husband had died for a crime he did not commit. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of grief and rage. Bethany moved through her small home like a ghost, touching Thomas's belongings. His spare shirt hanging on the peg by the door, his coffee cup still sitting on the table where he had left it that final morning. She could not eat, could barely sleep, and when she did, nightmares of the hanging jolted her awake in the darkest hours. But beneath the grief, something else began to take root, something harder and more focused than simple sorrow. She would not let Thomas's name die with him, branded forever as a rustler and a thief. She would find the truth, even if it killed her. 3 weeks after the hanging, Bethany finally emerged from her self-imposed isolation with a plan forming in her mind. She began asking questions around town, carefully at first, gauging who might be sympathetic and who would report back to the Thornton Ranch. The general store owner, a kind-faced man named Mr. Peterson, listened to her with genuine sadness in his eyes but could offer nothing helpful. The blacksmith turned away from her entirely, muttering something about not speaking ill of the dead or well of the living who defended them. The saloon girls whispered among themselves when she passed, some pitying, others judgmental, all useless to her cause. It was the livery stable owner, an old-timer named Jack Cooper, who finally gave her the first thread to pull. He had been in the business of horses and information for 40 years, and he remembered things that others wanted forgotten. "Your husband was a good man, Mrs. Garrett," he told her one evening as she came to check on the horse she could barely afford to keep. "I do not believe he stole those cattle, but believing and proving are different things, and this town does not want the truth if it means going against the Thorntons." "Then help me find someone who does want the truth," Bethany said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "There must be someone who saw something, who knows something." Jack rubbed his weathered face and sighed deeply. "There might be. About 2 days before they found your Thomas near that canyon, a cowboy rode through here asking questions about the Thornton Ranch. He was not from around these parts, had a look about him like he was tracking something. Stayed one night at the boarding house and then headed north toward the canyons. I remember because he paid me to keep his horse fresh and asked specifically about trails leading to the high country. You know his name, said his name was Quinn O'Brien. Had Texas written all over him from his accent to his saddle. Looked to be in his middle 20s, maybe 26 or 27, tall fellow with dark hair and the kind of eyes that do not miss much. He was not trouble, mind you, just focused. Paid his bills and kept to himself. Bethany felt something spark in her chest, the first glimmer of hope she had experienced since the hanging. Where did he go? Did he come back through? That is the strange part, Jack said, lowering his voice and glancing around the empty stable. He never did come back through town, at least not that I saw. And I see everyone who comes and goes. Makes me wonder if he found what he was looking for, or if he is still up in that high country. The high country, Bethany repeated, her mind already racing ahead. Where exactly? Jack hesitated, clearly torn between helping her and protecting her from what might be dangerous territory. Mrs. Garrett, those canyons are rough land, not fit for a woman alone. My husband died because of something that happened in those canyons, Bethany said, her voice hardening with determination. I am going, with or without directions. You can help me do it safely, or you can let me wander blind. The old man studied her face for a long moment, then seemed to recognize that arguing would be futile. There is a line cabin about 15 miles northeast of here, up in the hills past Maggie Creek. Ranchers use it sometimes during roundup, but it sits empty most of the year. If this Quinn fellow was watching the ranch operations, that would be a good vantage point. But Mrs. Garrett, I want you to understand, if he is mixed up in something dangerous, you could be walking into trouble. I am already in trouble, Bethany said simply. I just need to know the truth. She spent the next 2 days preparing for the journey with the methodical care of someone who knew that mistakes in the Nevada wilderness could be fatal. She packed water, dried beef, hardtack, and what few supplies she could afford from her dwindling savings. Her horse, a sturdy mare named Daisy that Thomas had bought for her birthday, would have to carry her through terrain she had never navigated alone. Bethany had grown up in Sacramento and had only moved to Nevada when she married Thomas, so the harsh desert landscape still felt foreign and unforgiving to her, but she pushed aside her fears and focused on the task ahead. On the 4th of September, just as dawn was breaking over the eastern mountains, Bethany rode out of Carlin heading northeast. The town was barely stirring, and she encountered no one who might question her departure or try to stop her. The morning air was already warm with the promise of another scorching day, and she kept Daisy to a steady pace, conserving the horse's energy for the long journey ahead. The land rolled out before her in shades of brown and gold, dotted with sagebrush and the occasional twisted juniper. Maggie Creek cut a green ribbon through the landscape, and Bethany followed its course as Jack had instructed, watching the sun climb higher and feeling the temperature rise with it. By midday, the heat was oppressive, and she stopped to rest in the meager shade of an outcropping, sharing water with Daisy and trying not to think about how small she was against the vast emptiness of the high desert. She reached the foothills by late afternoon, and the terrain began to change, rising into pinyon and juniper woodland. The air cooled slightly with the elevation, and Bethany felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. According to Jack's directions, the line cabin should be another few miles ahead, tucked into a canyon that offered both water and shelter. She pushed on as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and just as the first stars were appearing, she spotted a thin curl of smoke rising from behind a rocky ridge. Someone was at the cabin. Her heart hammering, Bethany dismounted and led Daisy quietly forward, approaching the ridge on foot. She had no weapon except a small knife she carried for practical purposes, and she suddenly realized how foolish she might have been to come out here alone. But she had come this far, and turning back now would mean abandoning the only lead she had. She tethered Daisy to a juniper and crept forward until she could peer down into the small canyon. The line cabin was a rough structure of logs and stone, built against the canyon wall for protection from the wind. A horse was hobbled nearby, a handsome bay gelding with a Texas rig on the saddle that leaned against the cabin wall. Light flickered through the gaps in the door, and as Bethany watched, the door opened and a man stepped out into the twilight. He was tall, just as Jack had described, with dark hair that needed cutting and a lean, muscular build evident even beneath his work shirt and vest. He moved with the easy confidence of someone completely comfortable in the wilderness, and he carried a rifle loosely in one hand as he scanned the surrounding hills. For a moment, Bethany thought he was simply checking the area, but then his gaze locked directly on the ridge where she was hiding, and he called out in a clear, strong voice with a distinct Texas drawl, "You might as well come on down. I heard your horse 5 minutes ago, and I can see your silhouette against the sky." Bethany felt her face flush with embarrassment at being caught so easily, but she straightened her spine and walked down into the canyon with as much dignity as she could muster. As she drew closer, she could make out more details of the man's face: strong jaw, sun-weathered skin, and eyes that were a striking shade of blue-gray, watching her with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "I am looking for Quinn O'Brien," she said, stopping about 10 feet away from him. "If that is you, I need to talk to you about my husband." The man's expression shifted slightly, the caution deepening. "I am Quinn O'Brien. And who might your husband be?" His name was Thomas Garrett. They hanged him 3 weeks ago in Carlin for rustling Thornton cattle. Bethany's voice wavered slightly on the words, but she forced herself to continue. "I know he was innocent, and I was told you were asking questions about the Thornton ranch right before he was arrested. I need to know what you know." Quinn was silent for a long moment, his eyes searching her face as if weighing whether to trust her. Finally, he lowered the rifle and gestured toward the cabin. "You better come inside, Mrs. Garrett. This is not a conversation for the open air, and you look about ready to fall over." She followed him into the small cabin, which was surprisingly neat for a temporary shelter. A fire burned in the stone fireplace, and supplies were organized efficiently along one wall. Quinn set the rifle within easy reach and motioned for her to sit on one of the 2 rough chairs while he poured coffee from a pot near the fire. "I am sorry about your husband," he said, handing her a cup. "I heard about the hanging when I came back through the territory about a week after it happened. I did not know they had moved that fast." "They did not give him a trial," Bethany said, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "Just strung him up based on circumstantial evidence and the word of the Thornton foreman. But Thomas was innocent, Mr. O'Brien. I know it in my bones." "Call me Quinn," he said, settling into the other chair and studying her with those penetrating eyes. "And I believe you, Mrs. Garrett. In fact, I know you are right." The words hit Bethany like a physical blow, and she nearly dropped the coffee cup. "You know, you can prove it." "I can," Quinn said slowly, "but it is complicated and it is dangerous. Before I tell you anything, I need to know how you found me and whether anyone followed you here." Bethany quickly explained about Jack Cooper and her journey from Carlin, assuring him that she had told no one else where she was going. As she spoke, she noticed Quinn studying her intently, and she became suddenly aware of how she must look after a full day of riding, her dress dusty, her hair coming loose from its pins, her face probably flushed from the heat and exertion. "All right," Quinn said when she finished. Here is the truth. I am a range detective, hired by a consortium of small ranchers from southern Nevada who have been losing cattle for the past 2 years. The losses have been systematic and well organized, and all the evidence suggested a large-scale operation that was moving stolen cattle through this territory on their way to markets in California. I have been tracking this gang for 8 months, and my investigation led me to believe that someone at the Thornton Ranch was involved, possibly at a high level. The Thornton Ranch, Bethany said in disbelief. But they were the ones who lost the cattle that Thomas supposedly stole. Exactly, Quinn said grimly. That is what made it brilliant. Set up a rustling operation, then occasionally report your own cattle as stolen and make a big show of catching the rustlers. It diverts attention from the real operation and makes you look like a victim instead of a perpetrator. I was here watching the ranch operations when those 40 head disappeared. I saw what really happened, Mrs. Garrett, and your husband was nowhere near that canyon when the cattle were moved. Bethany felt tears welling up, a mixture of vindication and renewed grief. Then who did move them? The Thornton foreman, a man named Cass Murdoch, along with 3 of the ranch hands. I watched them drive those cattle into the canyon in the middle of the night, and I followed their trail north toward the California border. They were planning to hold them in a hidden box canyon before moving them on, but something must have spooked them, because they left the cattle and rode back fast. That is when I figured out what they were planning. They needed a scapegoat, someone they could frame to take the heat off themselves. Thomas, Bethany whispered. They framed Thomas. I am afraid so. And I carry the guilt of that, Mrs. Garrett, because I was not there to stop it. I was following the trail of the stolen cattle, trying to find their holding location and identify all the members of the gang. By the time I realized what was happening and got back to Carlin, your husband was already dead. The cabin fell silent except for the crackling of the fire. Bethany sat very still, processing everything Quinn had told her. Here, finally, was the proof she had been seeking, the validation that Thomas had died an innocent man. But validation did not bring him back, and it did not ease the ache in her chest. Why did you not go to the law? She asked finally. Why did you not tell someone what you saw? Who would I tell? Quinn said bitterly. The nearest marshal is 3 days' ride away in Elko, and by the time I could get there and back with any kind of authority, the evidence would be long gone and memories would have become conveniently fuzzy. Besides, the Thorntons have money and influence. Without concrete proof, it would be my word against theirs, and I am just a cowboy detective. They would have buried me right alongside your husband. So what were you planning to do? Keep investigating. Build an ironclad case with documentation and witnesses that even the Thorntons could not buy their way out of. I have been gathering evidence for months, tracking shipments, identifying buyers, documenting movements. I am close, Mrs. Garrett. Maybe 2 more weeks, and I would have enough to bring in federal authorities. Bethany looked up at him, and something in her expression made Quinn shift uncomfortably in his chair. Then I will help you finish it, she said firmly. I will help you gather the proof you need, and when we take it to the authorities, I want my husband's name cleared publicly. I want everyone in Carlin to know that Thomas Garrett was innocent. Mrs. Garrett, this is not work for a civilian, especially not a woman who just lost her husband. It is dangerous. My name is Bethany, she said, and I did not ride all the way up here to be told to go home and wait. You said yourself you are close to having enough evidence. Let me help. I can do things you cannot. I can go back to Carlin and ask questions without arousing suspicion. I can get close to people who would never talk to a range detective. Quinn shook his head, but Bethany could see he was considering it. Even if I agreed, where would you stay? You cannot go back to Carlin tonight. "I will stay here," Bethany said. "There is plenty of room and I have my own supplies. Tomorrow we can start planning how to finish your investigation." For a long moment, Quinn looked like he was going to argue further, but then he sighed and stood up. "All right, Bethany. You can stay tonight and we will talk more in the morning when we are both thinking clearer. You can take the bed in the corner. I will make do out here by the fire." "I cannot take your bed," Bethany protested. "Yes, you can. You have ridden all day and you are exhausted." "Do not argue with me on this." There was something in his tone, a gentleness beneath the firmness that made Bethany's throat tighten unexpectedly. She nodded and retreated to the corner where a simple cot was set up with blankets, grateful for the privacy to collect herself. As she lay down, still fully dressed, she could hear Quinn moving quietly around the cabin, banking the fire and settling in for the night. Despite the strangeness of the situation, despite being alone in the wilderness with a man she had just met, Bethany felt safer than she had since before Thomas died. Here, finally, was someone who believed her, who could help her prove the truth. She fell asleep to the sound of the fire crackling and the night wind whistling through the canyon, and for the first time in weeks, she did not dream of the hanging. Morning came with surprising gentleness, golden light filtering through the gaps in the cabin walls and the smell of coffee brewing. Bethany sat up to find Quinn already awake, moving quietly so as not to disturb her. He had shaved and changed into a clean shirt, and in the morning light she noticed details she had missed the night before. The careful way he moved, the intelligence in his eyes, the quiet competence in everything he did. "Good morning," he said when he noticed she was awake. "There is coffee ready, and I have some bacon and biscuits if you are hungry." "Thank you," Bethany said, suddenly feeling awkward about the intimacy of the situation. She had slept under the same roof as a man who was not her husband, something that would scandalize the good people of Carlin if they knew. But the circumstances were hardly conventional, and Quinn had been nothing but respectful. They ate breakfast in companionable silence, and then Quinn spread out a hand-drawn map on the small table, showing Bethany the scope of his investigation. "The rustling operation is more complex than I initially thought," he explained, pointing to various marks on the map. "There are at least 3 holding locations where they keep the stolen cattle before moving them west. The Thornton Ranch is the hub, but they have accomplices at several smaller ranches who look the other way or actively help. The key figure is Cass Murdoch, the foreman, but I believe someone higher up is calling the shots." "You think Mr. Thornton himself is involved?" Bethany asked. "I am almost certain of it, but proving it is another matter. Murdoch is smart enough to keep his boss's hands clean. What I need is to catch them in the act of moving a shipment and to trace the money back to its source. That requires timing, luck, and someone on the inside who can give me advance warning." "What about the 3 ranch hands who helped Murdoch move the cattle the night they framed Thomas? Would any of them talk?" Quinn considered this, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "Possibly. Men like that are loyal as long as the money is good, but if they thought they were going to hang for Murdoch's crimes, they might be convinced to flip. The problem is getting to them without alerting Murdoch or Thornton that we are asking questions." "I could do it," Bethany said. "I could go back to Carlin and make it seem like I am just trying to understand what happened to Thomas. People might talk to a grieving widow where they would not talk to a detective. It is too risky. If Murdoch even suspects you are investigating, he will not hesitate to deal with you the same way he dealt with your husband." "Then I will be careful," Bethany insisted. "Quinn, you said yourself you need someone who can move in town without suspicion. I am that person, and I have more reason than anyone to want this finished. They argued about it for the better part of the morning, but gradually Quinn seemed to recognize that Bethany was not going to be dissuaded. Her determination, forged in grief and righteous anger, was unshakable. Finally, he relented with conditions. "If you are going to do this, we do it my way," he said firmly. "You do not take unnecessary risks. You do not confront anyone directly. You ask casual questions, gather information, and report back to me. We will need a way to communicate without being seen together in town. There is an old line shack about 5 miles south of Carlin, near the springs. Do you know it?" Bethany nodded. She and Thomas had ridden past it several times during their brief marriage. "Meet me there every 3 days at sunset. If you cannot make a meeting, leave a message under the loose stone by the door. If you are in danger, leave your blue scarf tied to the fence post, and I will come into town regardless of the risk. Understood?" "Understood." They spent the rest of the day planning her approach, with Quinn coaching her on what to listen for and how to ask questions without seeming to be investigating. He was patient and thorough, and Bethany found herself impressed by his intelligence and his careful, methodical approach to his work. He was not at all what she expected a range detective to be. There was a gentleness to him, a kindness that showed through despite the hard edges his profession had given him. As the afternoon wore on, their conversation drifted from the investigation to more personal topics. Bethany learned that Quinn was 26 years old, from a small town outside San Antonio, and had become a range detective after his family's ranch was nearly destroyed by rustlers when he was 19. "I know what it is like to feel helpless against people who think they can take whatever they want," he said quietly. "That is why I do this work. It is not about the money. It is about standing up for people who cannot stand up for themselves." Bethany told him about her life in Sacramento, her courtship with Thomas, their move to Nevada full of hope for a fresh start. She spoke of Thomas's dreams of buying his own land one day, of raising cattle honestly and building something lasting. Her voice broke when she described the morning they came for him, how he had kissed her goodbye thinking it was just another day, how she had watched from the window as they dragged him away. "He deserved better," Quinn said, and the sincerity in his voice made Bethany's eyes sting with unshed tears. "He deserved justice, and I promise you, Bethany, I will do everything in my power to give him that. We will clear his name." The use of her first name, the intimacy of it, sent an unexpected warmth through Bethany's chest. She looked at Quinn across the small table, really looked at him, and recognized that something was shifting between them, some barrier crumbling in the face of shared purpose and unexpected connection. It felt wrong to notice how attractive he was, wrong to feel her heart speed up when their eyes met, but she could not deny the pull she felt toward this man who had given her hope when she had none left. That evening, Bethany prepared to return to Carlin. Quinn insisted on riding with her until they were within sight of town, and they traveled through the cooling dusk in comfortable silence. When they reached the point where they needed to part ways, Quinn turned to her with an expression of concern. "Be careful, Bethany. These men are dangerous, and they have already killed once to protect their operation. Do not give them any reason to see you as a threat." "I will be careful," she promised. 3 days at sunset at the line shack." 3 days, he confirmed. Then, unexpectedly, he reached out and briefly squeezed her hand. The touch was quick, almost chaste, but it sent electricity through Bethany's entire body. She rode away without looking back, afraid of what her face might reveal if she did. Over the next 3 days, Bethany moved through Carlin with a careful balance of grief and determination. She attended church on Sunday, accepting condolences from townspeople with a quiet dignity that seemed to soften some of the judgment she had felt since the hanging. She shopped at the general store, making small talk with Mr. Peterson about the weather and the railroad schedule. She visited the boarding house where Quinn had stayed, chatting with the proprietor, Mrs. Chen, about her loneliness and her struggles to make ends meet. It was Mrs. Chen who provided the first useful piece of information. "Your husband was a good man, dear," she said as she served Bethany tea in her parlor. "I never believed those accusations. In fact, I remember that cowboy who stayed here, the one from Texas. He told me he was investigating thefts in the area, said he was working for the small ranchers. He seemed very interested in the Thornton operation specifically." "Did he say why?" Bethany asked, keeping her tone casual. "He did not, but I remember thinking it odd that the Thorntons would be under investigation when they were supposedly the victims of rustling themselves. Strange coincidence, is it not?" Bethany agreed that it was very strange and filed the information away. "Mrs. Chen might be a valuable ally if things progressed to the point of needing local testimony." On the second day, Bethany made a point of visiting the saloon in the early evening when the ranch hands came in for a drink before heading back to their bunkhouses. It was considered somewhat scandalous for a respectable woman to enter such an establishment, but Bethany was past caring about respectability. She was looking for the three men who had helped Murdoch that night, and she found two of them at a corner table, drinking whiskey and playing cards. She approached their table with her head bowed, projecting an image of fragile widowhood. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I am Bethany Garrett. My husband was Thomas, the man who was hanged for rustling." The two men exchanged uncomfortable glances. One of them, a young cowboy who could not have been more than 22, flushed red and looked away. The other, harder-faced and older, met her gaze with something like defiance. "We heard about that, madam," the older one said. "Terrible business." "I just want to understand what happened," Bethany said, letting her voice tremble slightly. "They said Thomas was found near the canyon with the stolen cattle. Did any of you see him there? Was he alone?" "We were not there, madam," the older man said quickly. "Murdoch and some of the boys handled that situation." But the younger one's face told a different story. He looked stricken, guilty, and when Bethany caught his eye, he flinched as if she had struck him. "I am not looking for revenge," Bethany said softly. "I just want to know the truth. If someone saw something, if they know something that could help me understand why this happened, I would be grateful. I just need to know." She left before they could respond, feeling their eyes on her back as she walked out of the saloon. She had planted a seed, and now she would see if it took root. The third evening, she rode out to the line shack just as the sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Quinn was already there, waiting for her, and the relief on his face when she appeared told her that he had been worried despite her precautions. "How did it go?" he asked as she dismounted. Bethany told him everything she had learned, including her encounter with the two ranch hands at the saloon. Quinn listened intently, his expression growing more thoughtful as she described the younger cowboy's guilty reaction. "That might be our way in," he said. "A young hand with a conscience is the weak link in any criminal operation. If we can get him alone, convince him that talking is safer than staying silent, he might give us what we need." "How do we get him alone without alerting Murdoch?" "Leave that to me. I will watch the ranch and find an opportunity. In the meantime, you did good work, Bethany. Really good." The praise made Bethany flush with pleasure, and she found herself smiling for the first time since before Thomas died. "What about your end? Did you learn anything new?" "I tracked another shipment moving through 2 nights ago. They are getting bolder, moving larger numbers. I think they are planning something big, maybe trying to make one last major score before winter sets in. If we can catch them during that operation, We will have everything we need." They talked strategy until the stars came out, and then Quinn insisted on riding part of the way back to Carlin with her again, making sure she was safe. As they rode side by side through the darkness, Bethany became acutely aware of his presence beside her, the solid reassurance of him, the way he watched over her without making her feel weak or incapable. It was different from how Thomas had treated her, not better or worse, just different, and the comparison made her feel guilty. "What are you thinking about?" Quinn asked, his voice cutting through her thoughts. "Nothing," Bethany said quickly. "Just tired." But Quinn seemed to sense she was not being entirely truthful. "You can talk to me, you know, about Thomas, about how you are feeling. This cannot be easy, any of it." Bethany was quiet for a long moment, and then the words came tumbling out. "I feel guilty. Here I am, working to clear my husband's name, and yet I find myself thinking about you, enjoying our conversations, feeling things I should not be feeling. What kind of wife does that make me?" "A human one," Quinn said gently. "Bethany, you are allowed to heal, you are allowed to move forward. That does not mean you love Thomas any less or that you are betraying his memory. It just means you are still alive, and living means feeling things, connecting with people. How can you be so understanding about this?" Quinn was silent for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion. "Because I know what it is like to lose someone and to feel guilty about moving on. I was engaged once, back in Texas. Her name was Maria, and she died of fever 2 months before our wedding. For a year after, I could not imagine being with anyone else, could not imagine feeling anything but grief. But eventually, life insisted on going forward, and I realized that Maria would not have wanted me to stop living just because she was gone. Your Thomas would not want that for you either." Bethany felt tears streaming down her face, and she made no effort to wipe them away. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I am afraid of forgetting him, afraid of what it means that I am starting to feel again." "You will not forget him," Quinn said with certainty. "We are going to clear his name, and his memory will be honored as it should be. But that does not mean you have to live in the past forever. When this is over, when justice has been served, you get to decide what comes next for you, and whatever you decide, it will be the right choice." They reached the outskirts of Carlin, and Quinn stopped, knowing he could not be seen with her in town. "3 more days?" he asked. "3 more days," Bethany confirmed. She hesitated, then added, "Thank you, Quinn, for everything." "We are partners in this," he said. "You do not need to thank me." But as Bethany rode the final stretch back to her cabin alone, she knew it was more than partnership she was feeling. Despite her guilt, despite the grief that still weighed on her heart, she was falling for Quinn O'Brien, and the realization was both terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The next week passed in a pattern of investigation and clandestine meetings. Bethany continued to gather information in town, slowly building a network of people who were willing to talk, either because they felt sympathy for her, or because they had their own grievances against the Thorntons. She learned that Cass Murdoch ruled the ranch with an iron fist, that several hands had quit over the past year because of his violent temper, and that there were whispers among the local ranchers that the Thorntons' success was too consistent, too convenient to be entirely legitimate. Quinn, meanwhile, continued his surveillance of the ranch, documenting movements and shipments. He also managed to track down the young cowboy from the saloon, a kid named Billy Patterson who was, as Quinn had suspected, the weak link in Murdoch's operation. Quinn approached him one evening when Billy was riding alone, checking fence lines far from the main ranch, and the conversation that followed gave them the breakthrough they needed. Billy confessed everything. He had been coerced into helping Murdoch move the cattle that night, threatened with losing his job and worse if he refused. He had watched as Murdoch deliberately left evidence near where Thomas Garrett had been working earlier that day, planting the seeds of the frame-up. He had stayed silent during the hanging out of fear, but the guilt was eating him alive, especially after Bethany had spoken to him at the saloon. "I will testify," Billy told Quinn, his voice shaking. "I will tell them everything, but you have to protect me. Murdoch will kill me if he finds out I talked." "I will protect you," Quinn promised. "But I need you to do one more thing for me. I need you to find out when they are planning their next big move. Can you do that without arousing suspicion?" Billy agreed, though his fear was palpable. 2 days later, he left a message at the location Quinn had specified. The Rustlers were planning to move a massive herd, nearly 200 head of stolen cattle, in 5 days' time. They would drive them through the night to a hidden canyon where they would be held, until a buyer from California arrived to take possession. It was the culmination of months of thefts, and if Quinn could catch them in the act with proper witnesses and documentation, it would be enough to bring down the entire operation. When Bethany met Quinn at their usual spot that evening, his excitement was barely contained. "This is it," he said. "This is what we have been waiting for. 5 days from now, we will have everything we need to not only clear Thomas's name, but to put Murdoch and the Thorntons in prison where they belong." "What do we do?" Bethany asked. "I am going to ride to Elko tomorrow and bring back the federal marshal. With Billy's testimony and my documentation, plus catching them red-handed, we will have an airtight case. But I need you to stay in Carlin and keep an eye on things. If anything changes, if they move up their timeline or if Billy is in danger, you need to get word to me immediately." "How will I do that if you are in Elko?" Quinn pulled out a piece of paper and sketched a quick map. "There is a telegraph office in Elko. Send a telegram addressed to John Smith at the marshal's office. Use the code phrase 'Aunt Martha is ill' if there is trouble. I will check for messages twice a day." Bethany memorized the information and then looked up at Quinn, suddenly afraid for him. "Be careful. If the Thorntons have connections in Elko, they might have people watching the marshal's office." "I will be careful," Quinn promised. He reached out and cupped her face with his hand, his thumb brushing gently across her cheekbone. "When this is over, Bethany, when we have finished what we came here to do, I want to talk to you about something, about us." Bethany's breath caught in her throat. "Quinn, You do not have to say anything now," he interrupted gently. "I just want you to know that these past weeks, working with you, getting to know you, it has meant more to me than I can express. You are the strongest, bravest person I have ever met, and when this is over, if you would be willing, I would like to court you properly. Not hiding in lined shacks and meeting in secret, but openly, the way you deserve." Tears welled in Bethany's eyes, but this time they were not tears of grief. "I would like that," she whispered. "I would like that very much." Quinn leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and then his lips met hers in a kiss that was both tender and full of promise. It was different from kissing Thomas, and that was all right. Thomas was her past, a past she would always honor and remember with love, but Quinn was her future, and she was ready to embrace that possibility. When they pulled apart, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. 5 days, he said. 5 days and this will all be over." 5 days, Bethany agreed. Quinn left for Elko the next morning, and Bethany returned to her careful watch in Carlin. The town seemed to sense that something was building, a tension in the air like the stillness before a thunderstorm. Murdoch came into town twice, both times with a hard look on his face that made Bethany's skin crawl. She stayed out of his sight, but she watched him from the windows of the general store and the boarding house, noting who he talked to and where he went. On the 3rd day, Billy Patterson rode into town looking terrified. He found Bethany at her cabin just after noon, his horse lathered from being ridden hard. "Mrs. Garrett," he gasped. "They moved up the timeline. They are moving the cattle tonight instead of in 2 days." Murdoch got word that the marshal might be sniffing around, and he wants to finish the job and clear out before anyone can stop them. Bethany's heart sank. Quinn was still in Elko, at least a day and a half away even if he rode hard. Where are they moving them? The same place, the hidden canyon north of here. They will start the drive after midnight, get them moved before dawn. Can you get word to Quinn? "I do not know where he is, madam. I just know they are going through with it tonight, and if we are going to stop them, we need to do something now." Bethany's mind raced. She could send a telegram, but even if Quinn received it immediately, he could not get back in time. She could try to stop the cattle drive herself, but one woman alone would be no match for Murdoch and his crew. What she needed was help, local help, people who had reason to want the Thorntons brought to justice. "Billy, I need you to trust me." "How many men do you think Murdoch is using for this drive?" "Maybe 6, including himself. He is keeping it small to avoid attention." "And how many local ranchers have been hurt by these thefts?" Billy thought for a moment. "At least a dozen that I know of. Small operations, mostly, folks who could not afford to lose even a few head. Can you get me names and locations? People who would be willing to stand up to the Thorntons if they knew they had a chance of winning." Billy nodded slowly, understanding what she was suggesting. "I can, but Mrs. Garrett, these are not gunfighters. These are just regular folks." "We are not going to fight them," Bethany said, her plan crystallizing in her mind. "We are going to catch them in the act and hold them until Quinn gets back with the marshal. Safety in numbers, Billy. If we have a dozen witnesses who can testify to what they saw, not even the Thorntons can buy their way out of it." Over the next few hours, Bethany and Billy rode hard, visiting every small ranch within a 10-mile radius. At each stop, Bethany told her story. How Thomas had been hanged for a crime he did not commit, how she had proof that Murdoch and the Thorntons were behind the rustling, how tonight was their chance to catch the criminals red-handed and bring them to justice. Some people turned them away, too afraid of Thornton retaliation to get involved. But others, people who had lost cattle or who had been pushed around by the Thorntons' influence, agreed to help. By sunset, Bethany had assembled a group of 11 men and 2 women, all armed and willing to ride with her to the hidden canyon. They were not professional fighters, just honest ranchers and townspeople who were tired of being victimized and who saw in Bethany's cause a chance to stand up for what was right. Jack Cooper, the livery stable owner, became the de facto leader of the group. "We will position ourselves around the canyon," he said as they made their plans. "When Murdoch's crew drives the cattle in, we will have them surrounded. We will not start shooting unless they do, but we will make it clear that they are not leaving until the law arrives. Mrs. Garrett, you need to stay back out of the line of fire." "No," Bethany said firmly. "I am seeing this through to the end. I will stay back if there is shooting, but I need to be there. I need to see this finished." Jack tried to argue but recognized the same iron determination in her that Quinn had encountered weeks before. "All right, but you stay with me, and if bullets start flying, you get to cover immediately." "Agreed, agreed." They rode out as the moon was rising, a ragged but determined group making their way through the darkness toward the hidden canyon. Bethany's heart was pounding, fear and adrenaline mixing in equal measure. She had sent the telegram to Quinn before they left, praying it would reach him, praying he would understand and come as quickly as he could. But whether he arrived in time or not, she was committed to seeing this through. They reached the canyon well before midnight and positioned themselves in the rocks and scrub around the entrance, spreading out so that they covered all the approaches. The wait was agonizing, every sound in the darkness making Bethany jump, every shadow seeming to hold threat. But she forced herself to breathe slowly, to stay calm, to trust in the people around her. Just after 1 in the morning, they heard the sound of cattle on the move, the low of confused cows and the shouts of men driving them forward. Bethany peered through the darkness and made out the shapes of the herd flowing into the canyon. At least 200 head, as Billy had said, valuable property stolen from honest ranchers across the territory. Behind them rode 6 men on horseback, and even in the moonlight, Bethany recognized Cass Murdoch's distinctive silhouette. Jack waited until the last of the cattle were in the canyon, and the riders had moved into the center of the herd, boxed in by the narrow walls. Then he stood up from his hiding place, rifle in hand, and called out in a voice that echoed off the stone walls. "Cass Murdoch, you and your men are surrounded. Throw down your weapons and put your hands up." For a moment, everything froze. Then chaos erupted. Murdoch cursed and went for his gun, and 2 of his men followed suit. Shots rang out, deafeningly loud in the enclosed space, and the cattle panicked, stampeding in every direction. Bethany ducked behind the rock where she and Jack had positioned themselves, her heart in her throat as bullets whined off the stone around them. The ranchers returned fire, not aiming to kill but to disable and intimidate. Within minutes, 2 of Murdoch's men were down, wounded but alive, and the others had thrown down their weapons and raised their hands, realizing they were hopelessly outnumbered. Only Murdoch kept fighting, firing wildly as he tried to break through the line of ranchers and escape into the darkness. It was Billy Patterson who stopped him. The young cowboy, atoning for his part in Thomas Garrett's death, rode directly at Murdoch and knocked him from his horse with a desperate tackle. They went down together in a tangle of limbs, and by the time they stopped rolling, Jack and 2 other men had their rifles trained on Murdoch's head. "It is over, Murdoch," Jack said coldly. "You are done." They tied up the captured rustlers and tended to the wounded, and then they settled in to wait for dawn and for Quinn to arrive with the marshal. Bethany walked among the captured men, looking each one in the face, searching for remorse or understanding. Most looked away, but Murdoch met her gaze with pure hatred. "Your husband was in the wrong place at the wrong time," he spat. "Nothing personal, just business." "He was an innocent man," Bethany said, her voice shaking with rage. "And you murdered him to save your own skin. I hope you hang for it, just like he did." "We will see who hangs," Murdoch sneered. "The Thorntons have lawyers' connections. You think you have one, but this is not over." But his bravado rang hollow, and Bethany could see the fear beneath it. He knew he was finished. Quinn arrived just after dawn, riding hard with the federal marshal and 2 deputies in tow. When he saw Bethany standing there alive and unharmed, surrounded by the captured rustlers and the rescued cattle, the relief on his face was so profound it made Bethany's eyes sting with tears. He dismounted and strode directly to her, pulling her into a fierce embrace that was anything but professional. "You terrified me," he said into her hair. "When I got your telegram, when I realized what you were planning, I thought I would lose you." "I am all right," Bethany said, holding on to him just as tightly. "We caught them, Quinn. We did it." The marshal took custody of Murdoch and his men, and Billy Patterson gave his full statement, corroborating everything Quinn had documented. The physical evidence was overwhelming. The stolen cattle, the captured rustlers, the testimony of multiple witnesses. Even the Thorntons' money and influence could not protect them from the weight of the case that had been built. Over the following weeks, the full extent of the operation came to light. Murdoch, facing the hangman's noose, turned on his employers and confessed everything. Edward Thornton, the wealthy rancher who had seemed so respectable, was arrested and charged with masterminding the rustling operation. The trial was swift, and the verdicts were unequivocal. Guilty on all counts. But more important to Bethany than any of the convictions was the day the judge issued a formal exoneration of Thomas Garrett. Standing in the courtroom in Elko, with Quinn beside her and the eyes of the entire territory on her, Bethany heard the judge declare that Thomas had been innocent, that he had been wrongfully executed, and that his name was cleared of all charges. It was not enough, could never be enough to bring him back, but it was justice of a sort, and it allowed Bethany to finally lay him to rest in her heart. Quinn stayed in Carlin after the trial concluded, officially to wrap up his investigation, but really because neither he nor Bethany could bear to be apart. Their courtship, as promised, became open and proper. He called on her at her cabin, bringing flowers and sitting with her on the porch as they talked for hours. He took her to church on Sundays and to the town socials on Friday nights, and if there were those who whispered about the propriety of a widow moving on so quickly, there were more who saw the way they looked at each other and recognized genuine love when they saw it. 3 months after the trial, on a crisp November morning with snow threatening in the mountains, Quinn asked Bethany to marry him. He did it properly, down on one knee in her cabin, with a simple gold band he had saved for and a heartfelt speech about how she had changed his life, how she had shown him what true courage looked like, how he wanted to spend the rest of his days making her as happy as she deserved to be. Bethany said yes without hesitation, and they were married a month later in the small church in Carlin, with half the town in attendance. It was a joyful occasion, bittersweet in its way because Thomas's absence was palpable, but also full of hope and promise for the future. Jack Cooper gave Bethany away, and Billy Patterson served as one of Quinn's groomsmen, a symbolic gesture that represented the healing and forgiveness that had come from their shared ordeal. They stayed in Nevada initially, with Quinn continuing his work as a range detective, while Bethany helped him with the administrative and investigative aspects of his cases. She proved to have a natural talent for the work, and they became a formidable team, known throughout the territory for their integrity and their dedication to justice. They built a small but comfortable home on the outskirts of Carlin, near enough to town for convenience but far enough for privacy. A year and a half after their wedding, in the spring of 1884, Bethany gave birth to their first child, a healthy boy they named Thomas Quinn O'Brien, honoring both her past and her present. Quinn proved to be a devoted father, and watching him with their son filled Bethany's heart with a completeness she had not thought possible after the dark days following Thomas Garrett's death. As their son grew, Bethany sometimes told him stories about his namesake, about the honest man who had died unjustly but whose memory had been honored in the end. She wanted Thomas to be remembered, wanted his story to be known so that the injustice he had suffered would not be forgotten. But she also told young Thomas about how his father Quinn had fought for truth and justice, how he had helped clear an innocent man's name and bring criminals to justice, how he had shown her that it was possible to heal from grief and find love again. 2 years after Thomas was born, Bethany and Quinn welcomed a daughter they named Grace, and 2 years after that, another son they called Daniel. Their family grew, and their home filled with the noise and chaos and joy of children. Quinn eventually took a position as a deputy marshal, working under the man who had helped them bring down the Thornton gang, and the work was less dangerous but no less meaningful. On warm evenings when the children were asleep and the desert sky blazed with stars, Bethany and Quinn would sit together on their porch, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. They would talk about their day, their children, their plans for the future. Sometimes Bethany would think about the young widow who had ridden alone into the wilderness looking for answers, driven by grief and desperation, and she would marvel at how far she had come, how much she had healed. "You ever regret it?" Quinn asked her one such evening when they had been married for nearly 10 years. "If you could go back and change things, would you?" Bethany was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "I would give anything to have Thomas not die the way he did," she said finally. "That injustice, that loss, will always be a sorrow I carry. But I cannot regret the path that brought me to you, to our children, to this life. I think we can hold both truths at the same time. I can honor what was and be grateful for what is." "You are wiser than I am," Quinn said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I just know what I know," Bethany replied. "And I know that love, real love, does not diminish when you share it. My love for Thomas does not make my love for you any less. They are different chapters of the same story, and I am grateful for both." As the years passed, Carlin grew and changed with the times. The railroad brought more people and more prosperity, and the wild lawlessness of the early days gradually gave way to civilization and order. Bethany and Quinn grew older together, their hair graying, their faces lined with the marks of a life well lived. Their children grew up strong and good, carrying forward the values of justice and integrity their parents had instilled in them. Thomas became a lawyer, dedicating himself to defending those who could not defend themselves. Grace became a teacher, educating the next generation of children in the growing town. Daniel followed his father into law enforcement, becoming a marshal in his own right. Bethany and Quinn watched their children build their own lives with pride and satisfaction, knowing that their legacy would extend far beyond their own years. In the summer of 1902, 20 years after Thomas Garrett's wrongful execution, Bethany stood once again in the cemetery on the hill overlooking Carlin. But this time, she was not alone. Quinn stood beside her, his hand warm in hers, and their 3 children were with them, along with spouses and grandchildren. They had come to dedicate a proper headstone for Thomas, one that bore the words "innocent man, wrongly accused, forever remembered." It had taken 2 decades, but the town had finally seen fit to honor Thomas's memory properly, to acknowledge publicly the injustice that had been done to him. The dedication ceremony was small but meaningful, with speeches about the importance of justice and the dangers of mob rule. Bethany placed flowers on the grave, and as she did, she felt Quinn's arm slide around her waist, steadying her, supporting her as he had done for 20 years. "He would be proud of you," Quinn whispered. "Of everything you have done, everything you have become." "He would be proud of both of us," Bethany corrected. "We did this together, and we have lived well in his honor." As they walked back down the hill toward their waiting family, Bethany reflected on the strange and winding path her life had taken. She had lost her first love to injustice and cruelty, had been broken by grief and rage. But from that brokenness, she had found the strength to seek truth, and in seeking truth, she had found Quinn. Their love had not erased her pain, but it had healed her, had given her a future when she thought she had none. The Wild West was changing, becoming tamer, more civilized, but the story of Bethany and Quinn O'Brien remained a testament to the power of courage, the importance of justice, and the redemptive nature of love. It was a story passed down through generations, told to children and grandchildren as a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope could be found, truth could prevail, and love could bloom in the most unexpected places. Bethany Garrett O'Brien lived to the age of 73, surrounded by the family she and Quinn had built together. In her final days, Lying in the bed she had shared with Quinn for more than 50 years, she thought about both the men she had loved. Thomas, whose memory had driven her to seek justice and whose name she had cleared, and Quinn, who had stood beside her through decades of joy and sorrow, who had been her partner in every sense of the word, who had shown her that it was possible to love again without betraying the past. When Quinn joined her 2 years later, at the age of 76, they were buried side by side in that same cemetery on the hill, their headstones standing as a testament to a love that had endured through hardship and triumph. And not far away, Thomas Garrett's marker stood as well, a reminder of the young man whose death had brought them together and whose memory they had honored throughout their lives. The story of how they had hanged her husband as a rustler and how she found the cowboy who could prove he died innocent became legend in Carlin and throughout Nevada. It was a tale of injustice overcome, of courage in the face of overwhelming odds, and of love that transcended grief and loss. It reminded people that truth mattered, that justice was worth fighting for, and that even from the darkest tragedy, beauty and hope could emerge. For Bethany and Quinn, it was simply the story of how they found each other, how they built a life together, and how they proved that love, when it is real and true, can heal even the deepest wounds. Their legacy lived on in their children, their grandchildren, and the countless lives they touched through their work and their example. They had started as a widow seeking justice and a cowboy seeking truth, and they had ended as partners, lovers, and soulmates who had walked through life hand in hand, making the world a better place with every step they took together.